During this webinar, what we're going to go over is basically the differences that we have between Studio Geo and Studio RM. So obviously, in the past, we only had Studio RM. This is where we did almost all of our geology work. Now we have a whole second program, Studio Geo. And this webinar is basically going to go over the differences between those two. So it's just to give you an overview of what software you want to use when, and just an idea of what each does best. So we'll go through a number of things. I've got a number of slides to show you, and then we'll also have a little look at Studio Geo and Studio RM live. So just to start off, hopefully, some of you have tuned into the other webinars. So this is kind of building off those two. So we've seen most of the tools that we have in Studio Geo, at least all of the basic ones. Obviously, there's a lot more to cover, and there will be more webinars next year. So Studio Geo lies right in the middle of our geology suite of software. So it's very similar to RM. But it also lies in the same group as stuff like Supervisor, Isatis, or Controller. So these might be other softwares that you know. And one thing with Datamine, one thing that we are trying to do is trying to have one whole ecosystem for all of our softwares. So our softwares all will run off the same platform. They share the same file types. Now, this just means it's very easy to kind of move files between softwares. There is no conversion. There is no extra work that you have to do to basically bring a file from RM into Geo or send it back. It all relies off the same DMX file format. So obviously, this is what we're focusing in on, mainly from a Studio Geo perspective, but we will also cover some of the tools in RM. So if you're not super familiar with RM, this will be a good opportunity to kind of learn about the unique tools that RM does have. So we also have all of our other softwares that we have here at Datamine. So stuff like production, labs, and sustainability. Once again, because these are all part of the ecosystem, they share a lot of the same file formats. So therefore, the data can be kind of spread around evenly between these. And there is no conversion needed. So with this, what are we going to cover today? So there's a couple of things that I'm going to spend a bit of time going over. So first of all, why was there a Studio Geo split off from RM? So what was the reason behind it? What is the core platform? Which tools do RM and Geo share? Now, this one's quite an important one because Studio Geo actually does share quite a lot of the tools of RM. And then what are the unique tools in Studio Geo versus Studio RM? So once we've gone over all that, we've seen all the similarities, all the differences, we can have a little think about which software should people use for what jobs. So the idea behind this is it's an explainer to say when we want to use Studio Geo over Studio RM. So hopefully this presentation will give you a bit of an overview on all that stuff. So let's get straight into it. So Geo and RM, why the split? So this is something that quite a lot of clients here in Australia ask me. If you have seen Geo versus RM so far, you will notice that they do look quite similar. So quite often people do ask, why was there a split? So let me just bring up my Studio Geo window. So this here is Studio Geo. You've probably seen it in the last couple of webinars. So we have a very similar layout to RM, which I have just here. So that's Studio Geo, and then this here is Studio RM. Now, from the get-go, you'll notice that, hey, there is actually not much of a difference in terms of the actual layout of the software. So we have the ribbon, we have all of our windows down here that share a lot of the same data. Now, where the differences really kind of come into play with Studio Geo versus Studio RM is number one, in the back end, and number two, some of the tools here have been either removed or moved around. So I'll just minimize these windows for now. We'll come back to them later. So one of the main reasons that Studio Geo was split away from Studio RM was that Datamine wanted to create a software solution directly targeted at production geos. So RM is a fantastic bit of software. It can do so many different things. It's got a lot of use cases that you can do basically anything that you need to. However, one thing that we did often hear was that Studio RM is quite a large bit of software. There's a lot of buttons. It can be quite confusing, especially for new users. So what we've done is we've basically simplified the UI, the actual window in Studio Geo to make it easier for production geos. So doing day-to-day production tasks, data collection, sampling, drill hole planning, etc. And basically make it for them so they don't have to go through all these menus. We've removed all the tools that they're not going to use. So that's one thing, making it simpler for production geos to use. The other thing that we focused in on was basically the implicit modeling tools. So if you were at the last two webinars, you'll know that Studio Geo is basically built around a implicit modeling workflow. So the issue that we had in Studio RM, obviously it has quite a lot of back-end stuff, typically for the estimation calculations. And for the developers, it was actually getting quite difficult to develop for. They were keeping on squishing more and more into RM, and it was getting a bit overloaded. So what this means is now that we have the split between Geo and RM, we're allowing the developers to make more specialized and complex tools in the implicit wireframing kind of field. So kind of similar to estimation, the implicit modeling requires quite a lot of calculations, a bit of computer power. So by having these split apart, it just means that we can put more resources into better developing the implicit wireframing. A good thing from the development perspective is that we actually have a separate development team now, so it's not shared just between RM. So this means that we're going to be able to have more quicker and more frequent updates, specifically for the production tools. And then, as I said at the start, we have removed many tools that regular geos use. So basically, we're just trying to clear up the UI and simplify it for regular geos. So a regular geo on site day to day is probably not going to be using the estimation validation tools. They're not going to be doing any simulations or variograms in Studio Geo. So these have all been removed. We'll go into what's there, what's hidden, because there are quite a few tools hidden but still accessible. So the overarching message for this is we're focusing in Studio RM for resource geologists, people running estimations, whereas Studio Geo is focused more on production teams. Now, that being said, obviously, we can use both, resource geos can use Studio Geo. Obviously, production teams can use Studio RM as they have been for many years. So just have a little looking at what the core platform is. So the core platform is the base for many of Datamine's software products. So as you can see here, we've got two windows down here. Now, it will be very difficult to tell from a glance which one's actually Studio Geo and which one is Studio RM. So with the core platform, it means that it's going to have a very similar layout, shared tools, and then also all the same places to get your regular help. So all through the help files and help desk, there are two slightly different buttons in the help files, but they're right next to each other. So both Studio Geo and RM are core products. They're going to stay this way. And probably the best thing about having this core platform is once you are familiar with RM, or if you get familiar with Geo first, in terms of the layout, buttons, and tools at your disposal, it just means that there's very little training required to get up to speed with the other software. So if you have done, say, a 3-day RM training course, to get up to speed with Studio Geo will take all of maybe 2 hours to go through the dynamic modeling workflow and kind of get up to speed with that. So it does save quite a bit of time and effort in terms of getting everybody trained up. It basically doesn't really need to be done because they do have quite a lot of similarities. So what we're going to go through now is a bunch of the shared tools that we have in Studio Geo and Studio RM. So these are all the things that they share, so you can use them over both. Some things might be easier in Studio Geo versus Studio RM. We'll kind of go over these, and then we'll actually have a look at some of the windows to see what it looks like. So the first thing, and probably very important for production geos, is our data collection and creation tools. So these stuff in the digitize ribbon typically, or the data sample analysis ribbons. So from here, we can do stuff like, easily importing a number of different data types, including from other formats. So Studio Geo shares all the same drivers as Studio RM does. So if you are, say, importing a block model from Serpac or Vulkan, it can all be done the exact same way as in Studio RM. We have all of our CAD tools up here for all of our day-to-day stuff. So creating points, strings, and then, all of our extra tools. We also have a range of data modification tools. So these are actually our like table merge tools or extra, where we can run calculations on our DMX tables and actually either collate data together or get new data out. And then finally, both also have the plotting system. So the plotting system is where we go to create our maps and graphics based off what we have in our window. So just having a quick look at Geo. So here we are in Geo. So for our digitize ribbon, you'll notice that almost everything is the exact same as in RM. We have all of our regular tools here. There basically hasn't been anything moved around. So if I click on the data, we also have almost all the same tools. Now, sometimes things have been moved around. So some of the buttons have actually changed locations. Some things have been removed. However, a lot of them are still accessible through the command line down here if we need access to them. So these are basically the exact same as in Studio RM. There might be a couple of very small things missing between these, but in general, it's all the same. There you go. So returning to the PowerPoint. So the next shared lot of tools that we have is the drill hole import and planning tools. So if you were with the Studio Geo webinar a couple of weeks ago, you'll know that the drill hole importer, which is up here and this button here, this is obviously a very important part of Geo, and it shares the exact same layout as Studio RM. It's probably a little bit more important in Geo because this is how we actually link our database to our 3D window so we can refresh our drill holes. So in the future, there might be updates to our drill hole importer that are specific for Studio Geo. However, at the moment, they share the exact same between Studio Geo and RM. So in Geo, we have all of our drill hole planning and drill hole warning tools. So if you are designing drill holes, open pit underground, it can all be done the exact same as here. And the warning tool is there for your underground proximity warnings. So we do also have a whole lot of other fields in here that we can use as well. So most of these are retained. Now, I think there are a couple of things that have been moved in Studio Geo. So if I go to my sample analysis tab, you'll see here, this is all of the tools that I have versus in Studio RM. We do have slightly more. So stuff like the geochemical processes have been removed. I think the structures is also been removed and some of the decluster options. However, for all the stuff that you'd regularly do as a MindGeo, Studio Geo retains all those key tools that we need here. So let's go back to here. So all of your drill hole planning can be done in Studio Geo or RM. They share much of the same system. Now, wireframing is an important one to cover because both Studio Geo and Studio RM do have the ability to create wireframes. So the main difference is Studio Geo is going to simplify the process of actually creating a repeatable set of wireframes. So if you have used the implicit wireframing tools in Studio RM before, you'll know that when you create an implicit wireframe, it will create one wireframe at a time, and then you'll have to close the window, bring up a new window, and then create a wireframe for a separate attribute. So this process, obviously, if you have, say, 20 or 30 domains, is a slow process. And the other thing is it does not automatically combine our wireframes into one kind of combined wireframe solid. So Studio Geo allows us to basically simplify this process and crunch it all down into a single, simplified process that can be repeated. So the main thing here is Studio Geo will basically allow us to update our wireframes as we go. So the more drilling we get, the more it will build out our models. In Studio RM, we can do that. It's more of a manual process. So Studio RM is probably better if you only want to generate one or two wireframes at a time, whereas Studio Geo basically allows us to repeatedly update and build our wireframes. So both Studio Geo and RM have our explicit wireframing tools. So where we want to build explicit shapes. So in this case, we've got, our vein in the wall. That's an explicitly made wireframe. Studio Geo allows us to basically merge our implicit shapes and explicit shapes into one combined shape as well. So that's something that is much more manual to do in RM. So they all work off the same algorithm. So you shouldn't see any change in the shape of your wireframe between Studio Geo and RM. So if you do, create a wireframe in RM and you want to import it into Geo, it should be no worries. It will look the exact same. It's using the same, basically implicit modeling algorithm to generate it. And finally, we do have all of our wireframe editing tools that allow us to basically edit our shapes, change Boolean shapes out of the other. So once again, Studio Geo retains all this because these are quite often the tools that we use as production geos to, do our stope shapes, and all of our evaluations. So next tools are the evaluation. So we have several tools that allow us to basically compare a wireframe against a block model and get our tons and grade. So this is just using our regular wireframe dynamic evaluate tool here. So this is probably the most used one. We do have all the other tools in Studio Geo. So stuff like TonGrad or PitMod are in Studio Geo. Now, one thing to know in Studio Geo, so here we are in Studio Geo. So normally all of our tons and grade tools are in the report tab. Now you'll see here, we actually do not have that many tools in the toolbar in Studio Geo compared to the toolbar in RM. So if I go here, you'll notice that I have quite a few other tools here. Now, I'll go over it in more detail a bit later, but the model reserves have been removed from Geo. Now, one thing that you might find interesting is in the report, we have tons and grade, which is a commonly used process, especially in macros to get your tons and grade out of your block model. So in Studio Geo, this has been removed. The button itself is not there. Now, one thing that you will see quite a bit of in Studio Geo is just because the button has been removed, it does not mean the tool has been completely removed. So I'm just down here in the command line box down here, and I'm just going to type in TonGrad, which is the name of the tool. And when I press enter, you'll see that TonGrad still is there. It's just hidden in the background. So the reason for this is in Studio Geo, we've removed a lot of the tools that are typically used in macros. So things like TonGrad, Holes 3D, that kind of thing. Again, this is basically just to simplify the UI, make it easier for people to use. As a production geo, if you're running TonGrad, it's probably going to be part of the macro. Otherwise, you'll probably use this dynamic evaluate, which is a visual tool that runs within the 3D window. So just keep that in mind. If you do not see a tool in Studio Geo, it does not mean it's straight up not there. Quite often, it's actually just hidden in the command line. So we have all the same tools. There's actually nothing that's been removed. Some buttons have been taken out of the toolbar, but we actually do have all of the tools in there. And then finally, plotting is obviously a shared tool. So this is the exact same layout. It has the exact same properties. So we can generate all of our plots here. Now, one thing I didn't touch on here in too much detail is macros. So Studio Geo and Studio RM use the exact same set of macro parameters. So if you have a macro written for Studio RM, it will be able to be used in Studio Geo. So just having a little look at the RM differentiators. So what is RM actually good at versus Studio Geo? So RM obviously stands for resource modeling. So the developers have focused in on the resource aspect of Studio RM. So within Studio RM, probably the most important thing to know is this is where we're going to go for our grade estimation. So this allows us to access the advanced estimation menus and all the associated tools with this. So we have quite a lot of estimation tools available. So we've got all of our regular estimation, so nearest neighbor, IPD, and then kriging. Within Studio RM, we also have quite a few more advanced estimation tools. So for example, MIK and uniform conditioning. We can also run sequential Gaussian simulations through RM. Probably easier to do it in, say, Supervisor or Icertis, but if you want to do it through RM, it is there. So this is the advanced estimation menu, and this is kind of a core part of Studio RM. So just in the advanced estimation menu, we can use this to do fast multi-threaded estimation. We can integrate directly with any supervisor projects that we might have, calculate some variograms, and we also have a number of other features that are available through this menu. So there's quite a lot that you can do with the estimation in RM, and most of it is done through this window itself. We also have the estimation tools that kind of lie outside this window, so uniform conditioning, simulations, that kind of stuff. So one thing that we have removed from Studio Geo, which is probably why you wouldn't be using it as much as a resource geo, is your estimation validation tools. So these tools up here. So obviously it's an essential part when you run an estimation. So a number of tools have been taken out of Studio Geo. Some of these are accessible through the command line. So I know that you can actually do swath plot now. They put that back in. But quite a lot of these can't be run in Studio Geo. So just looking at that real quick. So as you can see here in Studio RM, so in Studio RM, we have the estimate ribbon, which is here. So this has all of our estimation tools and our validation tools. We also do have a simulate tool window. This isn't there by default. You actually have to turn it on, but we do have our conditional simulation tools. In Studio Geo, you will notice that we do not even have an estimate toolbar. So this has been completely removed. We can't access the advanced estimation. That being said, I'll get into it in a little bit. We can actually still do an estimation in Studio Geo, but it just needs to be part of a macro process. So the idea behind it is mainly for grade control stuff. So Studio Geo differentiators. Obviously, we've been through a number of things in the last two webinars. So Studio Geo is designed to streamline the process of actually updating your models. So the main differentiator here is that we have this workflow system that we can repeat whenever we want. So this basically, as a summary, will allow us to update entire models in one click. It will save all of our settings. Basically, the idea behind it is a production geo can go to the office in the morning, press the play button, and it's going to update their model with any new drilling and any new data. So when would you probably prefer to use Studio Geo? Typically, it will be for wireframing activities, either implicit or explicit, day-to-day production tasks, so data collection, drill hole planning, evaluation of wireframes. Basic block modeling tasks can be done straight through Studio Geo. Now, a really good thing in Studio Geo is this can actually be automated. So you do not have to manually go through and create a block model like you used to have to do in RM or for a macro. And most importantly, obviously, tasks that can be regularly repeated can be put into the workflow. So it's almost like a another system on top of the macros. So the dynamic workflow sits very high. We can have macros run within it to do day-to-day production tasks. So for example, if you wanted to evaluate your stope shapes, that can actually be done as part of our dynamic workflow process. So we've seen this before, so I won't go through it in detail, but this is the dynamic modeling system. So this is the main difference between Studio Geo and Studio RM. Studio RM does not have access to this. So we're going to set up all of our tasks in here, and we can simply rerun it whenever we want. So we can create a number of different objects. So, a regular model, a fault block model, and block models all from this. So the explicit and implicit runs in a similar way to Studio RM. However, the fact that we can get everything all in one place and combined all at the same time saves you a lot of time over doing it independently. We can also combine our explicit and implicit shapes together. We've got a whole number of other tools in there as well. So, all of our fault tools, extra points, etc., etc. So with that, we also have the ability to automate a lot of our tasks. So probably the biggest one is our block model creation. So now we can get an updated block model every single time we rerun our model. So it just saves the process of having to either run a macro or do it manually each time. And we can go through and change all of the properties that we want to with this all through Studio Geo. So once you've set it up once, you don't have to keep doing it. It's basically set in stone until you decide that you might need to change some of the settings. And then finally, macro integration. So macros is really what unlocks a lot of the capabilities of Studio Geo. So we can put macros anywhere in our workflow process. So as we can see here, I've got some macros in here that will do certain tasks. So with the combination of the workflow process and the macros, we can almost do anything in Studio Geo and we can automate it. So if one of your key concerns is, repeatability, so, you don't want people to be selecting different settings every time they rerun the model, or you want to automate daily production tasks to, minimize any chances of errors, macro integration in here does a lot of good work in that regard. So we can repeat it. We can run macros. There's a whole bunch of other properties to do with macros that we can look at. This is probably something I'll cover next year in the Studio Geo webinars that I'll do. In this case here, so I did say before that we removed a lot of the estimation tools. However, we can actually run a estimation through a macro in Studio Geo. So the idea behind this is that we want to be able to basically run our grade control models. So we do actually have some of the estimation tools in the back end of Studio Geo. So for example, if you've gone on RM and you've created your EPAR, VPAR files, you've done your geostatistics, what we can do is we can simply feed those files into Studio Geo as part of a macro and then generate a grade control model from scratch. So the good thing about this is that every single day that you come into the office, you can actually have an updated grade control model ready to go for the day's tasks. So it just means that you're constantly on top of everything. You basically have the most up-to-date version of all your data as you can have. So lastly, what can't I use? So as I was saying, Studio Geo does have the ability to access actually quite a lot of the tools that RM does. However, some are either accessed directly through the command line or through a macro. So just as a quick example, in Studio Geo, we obviously do not have the estimate ribbon. However, if I come down here and I type in CoCreg, you'll see that we do have the CoCreg process in there. However, we're going to have to go through and manually create our EPAR, SPAR, variograms and stuff independently. So those steps can't actually be done in Studio Geo. However, if you've already generated those files, if you've been given them by your resource geo, you can simply put them in here and then run it. So what can't I use in Studio Geo at all? So there is a couple of things that we straight up do not have access to. So we currently don't have access to the MSO, so the STOPE optimizer, or the MRO. Now, I've actually asked for the MSO tool to be put back in. Typically, this is run by an engineer. However, I used to find it useful to have access to the MSO tools when I was a underground geo. We don't have access to the nonlinear estimation methods. So these run separately as a separate process to the other estimation tools. So we cannot use multiple indicator kriging or uniform conditioning at all. We don't have any of the variogram creation and validation tools in Studio Geo. This is all going to be done in either supervisor or RM. Simulation tools are also not in Studio Geo, so you can't run your SG sims or any of your validations. Geotechnical attribute calculator, that's probably not something that many geos would use very often. If your geotechs are using Studio RM, they'll probably want to keep on there because the calculator's in there for all their calculations. We are missing quite a few of the estimation validation tools. We do actually have a couple in Studio Geo. So Swath Plot, I think you can generate your ellipses as well in Studio Geo through the back end. Now for Studio RM, the only major tool that it does not have in comparison is the dynamic modeling system. Now you might think, oh, there's only one difference. But the thing is the dynamic modeling system is actually quite a large module. It covers a lot of ground in Studio Geo. So the fact that Studio RM doesn't have access to it is just going to slow down some of your tasks. Like I said, you could do it in RM, but Studio Geo is going to speed up your process quite a lot. So if you do try and use any of these tools, you'll get this little message saying this is unavailable in this product. So just as a summary, kind of what we're trying to get across at Datamine is what product should I use when? So who should be using what product? So Studio Geo is good for data collection, drill hole import and planning, wireframe creation, probably the biggest, the thing it does the best. Evaluation of wireframe and shapes, plotting data, then also basic GC estimation. So you wouldn't want to run a whole resource model through Studio Geo, but you can do basic GC estimation. But Studio Geo is definitely more based for production and exploration geos. So Studio RM, you want to use Studio RM if you want to look at any geostatistical analysis of your sample data, creating estimation workflows. So this would be from first principles. That can all be done directly through the advanced estimation window. Any nonlinear estimation or simulations, the validation of your estimations that you've already run. Currently, the MSO and mining optimization tools. Now, this might change in the future, but at the moment, these are only available in RM, and the variogram creation and analysis tools. So Studio RM is going to be geared more towards our resource geos or senior geos, the ones that might actually be using these tools. So the good thing with this is that if you only have a small pool of RM licenses, if you did get some Studio Geo licenses, it would also mean that you could free up some space for the resource geos and the senior geos to do the tasks they really need, because no day-to-day, production and exploration geos will be doing, MIK or SG sims. So Studio Geo would be right for them. It's also simpler, cleaner UI. Now, just finally, after this, just to touch on this in case anyone's unaware, sorry. This mainly applies to the Australian market. However, I think it is also going out to the international market. And this is kind of a message from the sales team here that wanted me to include this. So we do have a slightly different licensing system, which is basically devised around the user's role as main consideration. So as I've been saying, Studio Geo for production geos and Studio RM for resource geos. So with these role-based license systems, it's basically just like a collection of different softwares that this given geologist might use. So first category here is just for the production geos. So it contains Studio Geo down here. However, it also contains a number of other softwares such as Studio Mapper. So this is like our underground face mapping software, kind of somewhat similar to Rock Mapper. Controller for your open pit grade control programs. DH Logger's a core logging software, and then Mine Trust is our file collation software. So the second category, so these two over here, resource geos, and it will allow access to both RM and Geo of the estimation tools. So this is stuff like Supervisor and Isatis. So if you want to go and create your variograms or run a simulation or do top cut analysis, that can all be done using these. So with this being said, don't get worried that all of a sudden the previous licensing management is not going to be honored. So all products also just continue to be sold individually. So don't worry too much about that. Chances are it's not going to make much of a difference. One thing to note is that the role-based licenses are all subscription. This is basically a new business practice that we have going on here. So this is definitely the current in the Australian market. International markets, it will be also rolled out. I think Australia is just a little bit ahead of the curve in that regard. So hopefully that's just given you a bit of an overview of the differences between Studio RM and Studio Geo. Like I said, one thing that I did hear a lot of in the Australian market is people were not sure what the differences were between them and where to use them. So that should just give you a bit of an overview to make an informed decision on if you want to try Studio Geo or if you should continue using Studio RM. So as always, thank you very much for joining in. Feel free to reach out to my email on the screen if you do have any questions or inquiries.